But if you're thinking to yourself, I really want to quit my 9 to 5 or whatever it is and do this full time, we got to really, really lean into the business mindset. And it's more about the exposure creating opportunities than the exposure creating money. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all of the time. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode number 107. We talked about imposter syndrome. As I mentioned, I think during that episode or before that episode, some of the highest hitting episodes that I've recorded are about mindset and the internal struggle of podcasting. So I wanted to go back and touch on that to make sure we're adding value to that problem as well. Today, for episode number 108, a lesson from the music industry. The reason I wanted to do this episode is because I've been doing a ton of podcast breakthrough sessions. I gave a couple speeches, as you know, and a lot of people booked sessions. Not all of them were about podcasting. Some were about speaking. Some were about coaching. It was all sorts of different stuff. But a lot of the people who wanted to talk about podcasting asked a very, very similar question. And they said, how do you make money with your podcast? When people hear that we have 1,771 episodes as of today, over 1 million listens, and we have made over $1 million in our business, I think a lot of people's assumption is, oh, you have 1 million plus listens and you've made $1 million plus from those listens. And that, again, I know I've talked about this before, but I really want to connect it to something that I think will help it land if it hasn't yet. I think that's how a lot of people think. Oh, it's all from the podcast, right? We've talked about indirect versus direct and how there really is no difference. If the podcast didn't exist and you would not have made the dollars that you're making, it is directly from the podcast. If it's ads and sponsorships and affiliates and you make money from it, it's directly from the podcast. I think it's either all direct or all indirect. That's kind of the way I like to think about it. That's just my thoughts, open to interpretation, of course. But I was looking at something or listening to something the other day, and they were talking about how artists are very, very, very frustrated that Spotify pays such little for streams. I don't know the number because I'm sure it's different for music than it is podcasting. But let's just say you make, I don't know, I think maybe you make like $100,000 from 1 billion streams or something. I mean, that would make sense. Let's just say you're getting a penny per stream, hypothetically. Let's just say that. You get a penny per stream. A lot of people were complaining about the fact that these artists are going to struggle to make money from streaming platforms because a penny per stream, you're not necessarily crushing it, right? If you have 1 million, don't make me do math. 100 streams would be $1. 1,000 streams would be $10. 100,000 streams would be $100. 1 million streams would be $1,000. And then I guess 10 million would be, right? So let's go. We can go all the way through that. I'm not going to do the math because right now I'm not feeling super sharp when it comes to math. But you can see how you would need a lot of streams to make a meaningful amount of money. Another example of that is our podcast. So let's say right now the industry standard is $25 to $50 per 1,000 listens. That's what many advertisers and sponsors are willing to pay. Obviously, it can be above that or it can be below that. But let's just say we were on the high end and we were getting 50. Let me pull up my calculator for this. So we were getting $50 per 1,000 listens. All right, so I'm going to pull up my calculator. All right, so we have 1 million listens. Divide that by 1,000 times 50. We would have made $50,000 over the 7 years we have been doing this. For those 1 million downloads, those 1 million listens, we would have gotten paid $50,000 in sponsorship or ad revenue. We have made over $1 million and we've never done any sponsorships or ads because our business model is coaching and other products and services. Spotify is a really good opportunity to get exposure. So this is my thought, and this is the lesson from the music industry. Exposure is an opportunity. Spotify streams might not equal dollars, but Spotify streams equal exposure. And if you have exposure and then you have your business model set up the right way, you can turn that you can turn that exposure into potential finances. I love mixed martial arts. I am a huge UFC fan just because it's kind of the I won't say the oldest, but yeah, kind of the oldest and most prominent league of mixed martial arts. I like other ones too. Every Saturday, I pretty much watch UFC. There's a lot of talk about how UFC does not pay its athletes as much as other sports do. And that is true, right? You have people in the NFL and NBA making $30, $40, $50 million a year. I don't know that anybody in the UFC is getting paid that. But one of the things that a lot of people don't get is there is the opportunity to be creative and use the exposure of a massive platform like that to make money other ways. So there are a lot of fighters who also do streaming. There are a lot of fighters who do brand deals on their social media. There are a lot of fighters who have partnerships. There's a lot of fighters who have their own podcasts and they have their own brand that way. So that's another important, interesting thought, I think, is if you can use your podcast to create exposure, that creates an opportunity for demand. We can't always just rely on the platform. Now, I know YouTubers that are making a boatload of money. I was talking to somebody recently. I think they have 40,000 subscribers, and I think they're making anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 a month from YouTube AdSense. So that's YouTube advertisements. They don't have to do much, right? But it took them a long time to get to 40,000 subs. It's really dependent on what YouTube wants to pay you. So if something changes in YouTube, your pay might get cut drastically, and that happens all the time. That's always happening because something will change or there's a new law that gets passed or whatever it is, and then things change. I just don't want you to be at the mercy of a platform. I want you to be in the power of your business. So if we just start understanding that a single listen may never translate directly to a dollar in terms of the podcast, but it does create an opportunity for you to connect with someone, and there might be a way to create a business based on that. That's really what I'm trying to get to land on these podcast breakthrough sessions is if you don't understand business, if you don't have a product or service eventually, if you don't do coaching eventually, if you don't have sponsorships and affiliates and ads planned out eventually, it's going to be really, really hard to make money because you're not just going to make money by getting listens. It's just not really going to work that way. Now, again, are there exceptions to the rule? Of course there are. But just think about how long it's going to take to get to that place. The reason I use us as an example is if we were doing it that way, we would only be making like $7,000 a year or whatever it ends up being. And that wouldn't be enough to do the business. I wouldn't even be able to have this podcast because I wouldn't be able to afford all the stuff that comes with it. We wouldn't be able to do an episode every day on our other channel because we wouldn't be able to afford to hire a team and grow a team. We wouldn't be able to afford that. I wouldn't be able to afford to travel to go meet people and go to podcasting events and that type of stuff. I wouldn't be able to afford to do it. I just don't want you to fall into that trap.
I just wanted to take a quick second and give a shout out and a huge thank you to Next Level Podcasting Solutions, Kevin and his team. They have been incredible to work with, very flexible, on the spot with any questions that I have or any concerns that I have. When I first started out my podcast, I was doing everything on my own. I have no editing background. I have no podcasting background. I knew nothing about it. And so I was bootstrapping all of this myself while I was still trying to take on my role as a full-time mom. And once I met up with Kevin and we had these discussions and I got on board with adding an editing team, Oh my goodness. It just lifted this weight off of me. It lifted my time that I was spending doing my editing. And in the beginning, full transparency, when I was editing just my individual reportings, it was a little more manageable, not super manageable. And then when I started doing my interviews for the podcast, it was hours upon hours of me doing the editing that didn't include any of the promotional material that I am now getting from Kevin and his team. It wouldn't have been sustainable. I would not have been able to keep up with that. So I recommend Kevin and his team. They have done wonderful work in helping me grow my podcast. I have really enjoyed working with the editing team, and it definitely feels like more of a team environment versus me hiring them to do a specific job. I mean, we all work collaboratively on the projects that I have, and I have these crazy ideas sometimes, and they come up with a solution to fit my needs. I can't recommend them enough. I really enjoyed working with them. Kevin and the Next Level Podcasting Solutions, thank you so much for the work that you have done in the past and are continuing to do for me. I'm growing this community and growing this platform with a beautiful team that is working for me and with me to see my vision and help that come to life. So thank you again so much. I really appreciate you guys.
Now, if you come to me and say, Kev, I have no interest in coaching, I would just like the podcast to pay for itself. Sponsorships, ads, and affiliates might be a better thing for you. But if you're thinking to yourself, I really want to quit my 9-to-5 or whatever it is and do this full time, we got to really, really lean into the business mindset. And it's more about the exposure creating opportunities than the exposure creating money. That is the takeaway for this episode. Another really good kind of thought about it. I don't know how much money people are making off of their TikTok viral videos. I don't know. I don't know enough about TikTok, and it's just not something I want to dive into learning because it's not super applicable to what we're doing. It would be good to know so I can add value for sure, but it's just not something I've dove into yet. But imagine somebody, you know that song, What You Know About, I think it's called Astronaut in the Ocean. That song went super, super, super viral. And I'm sure that person made money. I don't know how much money they made off of it. I don't know what the agreements are. But what that also could create is the opportunity for that person to do more tours, for that person to get on podcasts and promote stuff that they have, to make their own podcast, to make their own YouTube channel, to make their own brand and create momentum that way. I don't know how much money they're making off of TikToks. Maybe they're making a boatload. I don't know. But that went super, 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 super viral. It's not always about the direct result that we expect. I'm a huge fan of Shark Tank. I love that show, Shark Tank. A lot of the shows a lot of the people that go on there don't get deals, but they still make money because of the exposure. It doesn't come directly from what they thought it was going to be. They get exposure. And they use that exposure for their website and their services and that type of stuff. Obviously, it's not the same, but just kind of as an example. So that's been a perspective that I've had for, I don't know, probably 4 out of the 7 years we've been doing this. In the beginning, I didn't know anybody that was podcasting personally. I didn't know anybody that was podcasting that was making money personally. And I didn't really know how to do this. And then eventually we started to learn what worked and what didn't. And then I started working with people and I really started to understand what worked and what didn't. And that's been the common thing is you have to think outside the podcast. You have to be super creative. And you have to understand that the exposure is an opportunity, not necessarily a conversion. This is a really good thought process. Okay. There's a lot of people out there that tell you not to do stuff for free. Okay. When I went to Toronto to speak, I didn't get paid a dime, penny, whatever the lowest amount you can get paid is. I didn't get paid anything. I paid for my travel. I paid for my Airbnb. I paid for the rental car. I paid for my food while I was there. I paid for all of that. And that was the agreement. It wasn't communicated to me, and there was no expectation that I was getting paid. Why? Because for me, it was a really good opportunity to meet awesome people. It was a really good opportunity to get exposure to people I hadn't met yet. And through that exposure came a lot of conversations. And through those organic conversations came people saying, Kev, what does it look like to work with you? And then several of those people ended up becoming clients, which I'm super, super grateful for. But that wasn't the mindset of it. The mindset was, well, this is exposure. I don't expect anything to come from the speech the day of. I don't think anything's going to happen. And nothing did. We're talking a month later. Things are kind of sort of starting to happen. It was about the exposure, and the exposure became an opportunity. And then the opportunity ended up going where it was going to go. So that's really my takeaway in this episode. Exposure is a really good opportunity, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything is going to come of it. And if you have creative ways to grow and monetize, this is mostly about monetizing. If you have creative ways to do that, exposure just makes life easier. It's not the thing that does it, but it is the thing that can make life a lot easier. That's my takeaway for this episode. Now, last thing. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule. Yeah, there are some people who are going to go viral. It's a very small amount. Yes, there are some people that are going to get really good sponsorships and really good ads and really good affiliates. Yes. But I don't think it's going to be the majority of us. And I like to teach based on what I know and what I've experienced. And I've worked with a lot of people. I think the most, and this was based on the fact that the client asked me and they said, would you do this? What do you think of this? I think one of the best sponsorship deals that I have been a part of, in terms of like working with this client. I didn't write the paperwork. I didn't come up with the numbers. This is just the way it happened. I think they were getting $700 a month, and they were getting a percentage of anything that they sold. So that's good, right? But this person had hundreds of thousands of listens. They were very, very niched. They knew this person really well. There was a lot of things that went into that. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying if, number one, this person isn't podcasting anymore. I worked with this client like 4 years ago, and then we stopped working together, and I think their podcast has since kind of died. They don't want to do it anymore. I don't think. But I'm convinced that's one of the reasons, because they said, well, I got a sponsorship. Now I have to find a way to get another sponsorship with more money and another sponsorship with more money to cover my living expenses. And it's really, really hard to do that. I'm not saying you can't do it. I just don't want any of us to go super deep into that, realize maybe it's a personal dead end, and then not be able to do the podcast because of it. So that is my takeaway. All right. If you are struggling with creativity around your podcast, around your business, around where people are supposed to go, make sure you listen to next episode because we're going to talk about that. Click the link in the show notes for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. I've been doing a ton lately. It's been amazing. I get to meet awesome humans. I get to learn more about podcasting and what people are struggling with. And most importantly, I get to add value and draw some squiggly lines on the Zoom whiteboard, which is always fun. I hope for you that you're not affected too much by the summer lull. I know a lot of podcasts kind of dip in summer because people are traveling and outside and all that stuff. So I hope that's not affecting your self-belief and your self-worth too much. I hope you're being really creative. I hope you're being really, really creative, because the creative people are the ones that are going to end up winning. I hope you haven't forgotten to hit record lately when you have a really good guest or a really good interview. And I hope you're staying consistent on understanding that at the end of the day, we have to tap into what value does this bring to the audience? Who is the audience? Continuing to get specific on those things. All right. Until next week, keep on crushing it. Keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you then.